Hi, I'm John the Mouse. In this video, we're going to talk about the running diesel fuel in the wintertime weather and what you can do to keep the fuel available for your engine to use. This is just some of the stuff I go over in detail at John the Mouse University. With better information, you can make better decisions, not only on your transportation business, but on your personal transportation. So let's roll into it. There's a lot of factors to when a diesel gels. What's in your diesel fuel will say a lot about when it gels. Diesels of the past had a higher sulfur content and gelled at a lower temperature point. Nowadays, we have ultra-low sulfur diesel. Then you add biodiesel into the mix, you can start having problems even before water freezes. We went over a little bit earlier on some of the problems you can have with biodiesel. I think we should go over some terms. The first one we'll go over is cloud point. This is the first sign you'll see in your fuel tank. Then you know you have problems with your diesel fuel. Small solid crystals start to appear in the fuel. They'll be hard to see in the tank if you have a car or a pickup truck. On a semi, pretty easy to see when you take the cover off and look inside. And with a flashlight, shine it in the diesel fuel, you'll be able to see if it's clear or cloudy. Now, if it's not too cloudy, depending on your equipment, you might be all right. But if it is a lot more cloudier, you should add additives right away before you start the truck. We will discuss later on what additives you should be looking for in another section. As it gets colder, more crystals build up in the diesel fuel. The cloudier the diesel will look. You also have suspended water in the diesel fuel. It'll start freezing. At this point, you'll start to have cold filter plugging point, or CFPP. At this temperature, the wax crystals in the diesel fuel become large enough to start clogging fuel filters. At this point, you'll be starving your engine of fuel. Remember, wind chill will reduce the time it takes to cool down fuel in the fuel lines. You can have gelled fuel in the fuel lines before you see it in the tank. As the temperature drops, some more of the diesel will get to the pour point. This is when the diesel gets so viscous with gel that it will no longer flows. You can also imagine it as thick pea soup. It can get thicker as the temperature drops colder until diesel becomes entirely solid. Now, you can see this is happening if you filled a storage tank in the summertime and forgot to add additives for the wintertime. In the wintertime, you'll find fuel stations that have signs up that say they have winterized diesel. They will have number 2 diesel that is sometimes blended with number 1 or with just an additive to resist gelling in the colder temperatures of your area. Now, for most people, this is just fine. Truck stops will carry number 2 diesel for semis. Now, why would you carry number 2 diesel in the wintertime if it can gel? Number 2 diesel is actually cheaper than number 1 or kerosene, and you get better fuel mileage out of number 2 diesel. Let's talk about different things you can do with diesel to keep it from gelling, as well as keeping it at the best performance. I'll talk about a few situations I've done in the past to give you some ideas. You'll have to figure out what is best for your situation. I have a kerosene sitting at home in a 5-gallon container. I will blend in 1 or 2 gallons every fall into the tractor, depending on how many gallons of number 2 diesel I put in it. The ratio I've been doing for years is 1 gallon or so of kerosene to 10 gallons of number 2 diesel. Now, it's a tractor. I'm not worried about the best fuel mileage. I just need to make sure that it's going to start in the wintertime during blizzard-like conditions to move snow. I have also added some additives over the years, but I mostly rely on the kerosene mix. But when it gets down to that 20 to 30 below temperatures, I also have to rely on plugging it in and using some ether as it sits in the elements. My other diesel vehicles rely more on additives to treat the fuel tanks with winterized diesel. There has been a few occasions when temperature drops enough and you can see the diesel become cloudy. That's where I have to add more additives to the tank. But you also have to remember, these vehicles get started up 2 or 3 times a month. Now, the semi, on the other hand, I don't normally treat for cold weather. In that situation, I can keep a closer eye on it because I use it almost every day. Either it's parked inside during the cold weather or have an APU unit running to keep the fuel warm. It really boils down to cost on decisions you make. If the APU unit should quit during the cold weather, it could mean gelled fuel tanks after a few hours of really cold weather. Depending on how big the tanks are and how full the tank is with quality fuel. I have seen it many times over the years when it's super cold. There'll be trucks on the side of the interstate road, a mile from the on-ramp, each direction from a truck stop they filled up at. They're all gelled up. It's not uncommon to see white smoke coming out of the smokestacks of these sideline trucks before they're completely gelled up and have to change the fuel filters. I will touch on the white smoke coming out of the diesel during cold weather. Then I will give you my theory about what is happening to cause these trucks to gel up after filling. Diesel engines are notorious for producing white smoke when the engine is cold. During this time, the fuel doesn't burn completely and can experience a buildup of soot and carbon deposits, which can further reduce performance. Fuel injectors can become clogged with debris in the fuel, causing the diesel engine to cool down and to produce white smoke in the cold weather. If you don't turn this around, your truck will starve of fuel and die. A few things you can do is add some additive and stop taking heat away from the engine by shutting the heat off to the cab of the truck. Let me give you my thoughts on what is going on with these trucks on the side of the road. We're going to apply some of what we already learned in our course. They have come in with less than a quarter tank of fuel. This is a very bad idea for wintertime. Always have more than half a tank of fuel. By putting all that cold fuel in the tank has brought down the fuel temperature in the tank. As they were filling their tanks with super cold fuel, it is hitting the bottom of the tank, mixing up any water that's on the bottom along with all the other contaminants that were sitting on the bottom of the tank. Now remember that all tanks made don't draw fuel from the very bottom. That gives room for water to settle out of the fuel, a place to go. Water is the enemy in the fuel story. As we learned earlier, water freezes before fuel. Before you know it, you have small solid crystals floating around in your fuel. Remember from our other course, the fuel pump filters fuel at 30 microns. Letting in more contaminants are way too big for your fuel injectors. These contaminants start plugging up your fuel filter and fuel injector. In return, they'll leave you stranded on the side of the road. Less power, less heat as you circle the toilet bowl. Now it's time to give you some solutions that have worked for me, so you don't end up gelled up on the side of the road. I can't stress this enough to get to know your fuel and equipment. Know the weather that's coming into your area and that you're at or moving to. Never let your fuel get lower than half a tank. This also reduces the likelihood of condensation, which we learned about in another course, that it will introduce water into the diesel tank. If you run a refrigerated trailer, I always add additive to the fuel. And I will add number 1 if I can when it's available. And another hint is if it gets super cold out, I will switch it to continuous mode to keep the fuel circulating. And it does warm the fuel just a little bit. Make sure you always bring your additives that you're going to use with you. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an area that has gotten really cold and all the additives are nowhere to be found. There are some preventative measures you can do that can help depending on your situation. Many trucks and equipment nowadays that run on diesel are equipped with block heaters. You plug them in with the extension cord, and they will warm your engine by warming the coolant with a heater element. It's basically the same type of element that you'll find in a water heater at home. As the coolant warms up around the element, it will rise in the coolant. The coolant's main job is to transfer heat away from the engine. Now we see it's the main job to put it back in. By having a warm motor, it reduces the wear and tear during the first few moments of ignition. I have seen some people put tank heaters that have magnets. They stick it on the side of an oil pan to warm the oil. Now, this isn't as efficient as warming the coolant inside the block of the engine. This is where I think something is better than nothing. Now, you might be able to stick one of these silicone pad heaters to the bottom of your fuel tank to keep it from gelling. I have seen a few drivers use a little gas generator so they can plug in their truck. Honda gas generator seems to be a favorite. Should be able to plug the truck, fuel tanks, and maybe heating blanket. Now, I've also seen pilot cars, semis, and delivery vans use a gas generator. I have seen a couple drivers now use generator to power a mini split on the back of their sleeper unit. Another popular choice is getting a 2-cylinder diesel engine, APU, auxiliary power unit. A lot of different companies make APUs. They're all pretty well tied into the truck system of fuel, electrical, coolant, and they can also provide generator power. We can actually grow on this heating the coolant to keep things warm. Then all you have to do is circulate the coolant around to the other things you want to warm. Then you can use it to heat up fuel filters like the FAST system. You can plumb your coolant lines around fuel lines to help keep the fuel warm. Now, some of the semi-drivers run an antifreeze line in the bottom of their fuel tank to aid in heating the fuel. It has a stainless steel tube that the coolant passes inside the tube. It is surrounded by the fuel in the tank. In return, it's warming the fuel in the vehicle's storage tank. If you're operating diesel equipment or vehicles in cold climates, it is essential to be aware of the type of diesel you're using and its cold weather properties. It's also beneficial to utilize winterized blends or additives to prevent fuel gelling and the associated operating issues. Whenever possible, keep the vehicle indoors in a temperature-controlled environment to minimize exposure to the extreme cold. I know most don't have a place to keep your business vehicle inside. I'm hoping you'll earn enough so you can afford to get a place to park your business vehicle inside. Until then, let's keep an eye on your diesel. Rotation of your older fuel is a good practice to use. Check for water contamination. It can freeze and cause problems for you. Drain any water from storage tanks you have control of. Fuel stabilizers can help the fuel so it doesn't degrade as fast by slowing oxidation and microbial growth. It would be better that your fuel didn't have anything for the microbials to feed on. Cold diesel in the cylinder ignites at a higher compression ratio than warmer diesel. Remember, the compression raises the air temperature in the cylinder. As your diesel engine sprays diesel into the cylinder, it will spontaneously combust at the right time. Colder diesel takes more heat to ignite it spontaneously. A lot of times you need to help the diesel out. A lot of the older engines, you would spray ether in the air intake to make it more flammable, as the air mixed in the cylinder with the diesel. You don't want to be spraying ether if your engine has glow plugs. The high cysteine number diesel fuel takes the place of ether for starting the truck. After starting a cold diesel engine, you'll notice how rough it runs, or known as engine knock. If you continue to have a knock, it can harm your engine. The important part is once the engine warms up, the high cysteine level can actually change the timing of the ignition point. That can actually lead to better fuel mileage if you're getting more out of your diesel at the right time of the compression stroke. Let me share with you a study from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, found that increasing the cysteine number of the diesel fuel from 40 to 55 can result in a 3 to 5% increase in engine power and a 2 to 3% improvement in fuel economy. Cysteine level in the diesel also helps make diesel fuel a little more resistant to gelling. Most add this chemical to add cysteine to the fuel. That might be something to consider when you're looking for a fuel additive for your vehicle for wintertime use. Wintertime gives you a lot of challenges for running a transportation company. The cold weather is hard on your equipment. Depending on what state you're in, it'll depend on what they spray on the roads you travel. It's also hard on your vehicle.